Right. Syncing with my stream. All right, and we're live. Welcome everyone to the Global Entrepreneurship Week of Southeast Asia edition. My name is Jaren. I'm the moderator for today's panel. Today we'll learn a bit more about the Africa Startup Ecosystem Insights, both from Jan 22 on Salon, representing South Africa, as well as Jan Botswana. So today we have with us two distinguished guests, both from the Jan community itself. We have Dr. Gamu from 22 on Salon. She's the Chief Operating Officer there. We also have with us Mr. Mukisi, Managing Director of Jan Botswana. Right, so warm welcome to both of you. Yeah, and I think without further ado, let's just have Dr. Gamu to start off with an introduction of yourself. What do you do? And we'll carry on with Mr. Mukisi. Yeah. Dr. Gamu, please.
Awesome. Firstly, thank you so much for setting up this panel discussion. It's always a bliss having conversations like this for GEW. As you rightly mentioned, my name is Dr. Gamuchirai Mutezo, and I oversee the operations at 22 on Sloan. And 22 on Sloan is Africa's largest startup campus. We have co-working spaces, tailored programs within incubation, acceleration, and most importantly, the fun part, having co-creating activities with our Gen Africa counterparts, intent having Muketsi here representing Gen Botswana. And some of the key elements that we focus on are early stage entrepreneurs, as well as just unpacking what small business entails before we start deliberating on implementation. We also ensure that from a marketing perspective, access to markets, access to funding, the exposure is had by African entrepreneurs who equally look to get within the continent or beyond. So that's what we do literally in a nutshell.
Thank you, Dr. Gamu. Right, Kinsey, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jaren. So my name is Moketsi Benedict Pekere. I'm a tech entrepreneur who's transitioned himself into what I call an early stage investor. So I look after Jan Botswana, as an ecosystem driver of the ecosystem in Botswana, basically predominantly startups, right? Which is the main thing that we're actually driving in Botswana. I'm a co-founder of Rwanda Africa, which is Botswana's only pre-seed startup accelerator. We run a startup program, and we're in the process of actually setting up a micro fund. And when I say micro fund, I'm talking small checks, $1,000 to $10,000, because we think like there's a funding gap. So we've successfully in the last couple of years been able to execute partnerships to make things happen with DFIs like the World Bank, the AFD, the French Digital Africa Initiative through 22 on Sloan. We've collaborated with them before. We're also working with corporate banks like Stanbic Bank in Botswana, and they are actually our corporate sponsor for this year's GEW. We've also driving the startup education in Botswana through insights and so on, through the Botswana Innovation Hub, who we've had a contract with for the last 2 years and so on. And obviously, our main mandate with Jan is to connect the ecosystem, right? So I think when you see Botswana where it is we've done a great job in laying the foundation. There was nothing when we actually came in with Jan, and when you look now, there's a whole lot of excitement around Global Entrepreneurship Week. We've got more than 10 events this year. So so it's very exciting to see the energy, and that there's a lot of entrepreneurship that's very alive and healthy, but it's very nascent. So we're very happy to be connecting with fellow countries like Singapore, who we look up to in terms of a model coming out from Botswana, right? Yeah, so that's about us, right? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mukintsi. All right, so thank you for introducing yourself. I think both organizations really work hand in hand to grow the ecosystem in Africa alone. And I think that inspiration could also help many other Gen chapters, as well entrepreneurs, investors looking to explore the region, because this region is huge and it's growing, up and coming region to look at, especially for investors looking for promising startups. Maybe I would like to ask Dr. Gamu, maybe could you share with us, what's something exciting in South Africa? What's happening in the local ecosystem?
Awesome. The past year and a half certainly has come with its own bells and whistles, but depending on the perspective that you look at things, it equally offers opportunities. So from primarily a Sloan perspective, what we've seen is that there are a lot of small businesses who've been striving and trying. The ginger is there to want to reinvent and redefine where they are. What was missing during these difficult times were platforms where education and insights are offered in terms of making decisions amid all of this madness. But we started seeing that as the vaccination programs are going on and people are getting out of their houses a lot more, those connections and conversations are happening because we're able to network once again. Zoom and Microsoft Teams, yeah, they did their part for a certain extent, maybe extreme lockdown. But as we look into the levels 2, 3, 1, it's a little easier to see these connections and conversations happening because there are certain insights and business deals that one cannot always capitalize from a virtual platform. But that being said as well, there were a lot of support structures that were taking place, more so across the continent. You'd find conversations between Gen South Africa happening with Gen Nigeria, happening with Gen Tanzania, and getting insights to see what our counterparts are doing amid the madness. We ran quite a few competitions and noted that new opportunities presented themselves in sectors such as the healthcare industry, energy, fintech, as well as agriculture, because these are the realities that the entrepreneurs and small businesses were facing amid all of the madness. Now, from an ecosystem development perspective, in terms of partners who support these entrepreneurs, it's picked up quite a bit, although quite a few were negatively affected in terms of their capability and capacity to work with the entrepreneurs. But thank goodness for co-creation and collaboration, because we're able to engage each other and put a few ideas on the table in terms of how we can actually support the startups. So getting into 2022, it's quite an exciting space, simply because quite a lot of academic and industry research equally acknowledges the continent as the next best thing after sliced bread. Now, if one is reading your World Bank reports or reports by management consulting companies telling you that, and us from an ecosystem perspective, we're equally replicating it, this is where the fun is going to be. So as long as we manage to address and adhere to the principles and protocols of the COVID-19 vaccination program and so forth, at least it puts us in a better space to see those opportunities being realized.
Right, that's right. I think you've rightly pointed out on the ecosystem doesn't work on its own. It's also with neighboring countries, as Africa as a region that's highlighted by many economists, also by management consultancy firms. I just wanted to also ask Mr. McKinsey, right? Is there anything exciting or unique that's coming up from Botswana ecosystem?
Yeah, well, look, Botswana is land linked, right? Let's not call it landlocked, because South Africa is like Big Brother, right? If Gamu decides she's closing the borders and doesn't want to give us the vaccine, we really can't do anything. I mean, as I just told you, we literally, with the lesson of COVID, I think we learned one thing about being an economy that is reliant on the region, right? We saw the power of the region. We woke up and there was no food in Botswana during COVID, like literally, and also the importance of logistics, right? The borders were closed and trucks were stuck at the borders because simply you couldn't move the food and the drugs. And currently, when we moved into a situation where the vaccine was moving in the continent, again, because we were landlocked, we just simply couldn't get access to resources, right? So small sometimes is beautiful, but it's also a disadvantage. But what we picked is I think there was a big push for platform because people woke up one morning, you are not able to do anything, you are forced to go online. So the biggest lesson is every single country needed to make sure its bandwidth or its infrastructure is functional. So, and we've seen in Botswana, for example, the energy from the government in trying to just get the infrastructure connected, just to make sure the guy in the rural area who's locked in the home because he's not vaccinated or he's sick is able to get his medication on time, right? Because there was just a whole complete lockdown of economy and you couldn't move from one city to the next. So, and the closure of just opportunity because, of the COVID situation. So there was a big message sent, I think, across the ecosystem in terms of, hey, you need platform, you need software as a service, right? You also need to make sure your infrastructure is functional in terms of whether if it's food security, and that's where the agri-techs emerged. We saw the rise of companies that were just emerging during the COVID time, being able to track animal feed. As you know, Botswana has like 2 million plus or 3 million plus livestock, which is more than the human dividend that you have, right? So people were worried about their cattle not being monitored because they couldn't visit the farm because they're locked in the city, because you don't want to move the disease from one place to the next, right? So software as a service emerged as a win and as a validation for the future economy in Botswana. What I also picked just out of the interest is the continent raised more than $3 million plus dollars, I think, in angel investment that went to startups. So as to whether if there's a startup in Botswana that got the share of the 3 million, well, we need to figure that out. But from where we sit as an accelerator, we saw the energy of young people, with the interest to now innovate and build what I call as innovation-driven enterprises. And a strong message that, we are really tired of the brick and mortar businesses, the SMEs, right? So economies now are looking for software as a service startups. And the rise of the early stage investor opportunities now. And that's why even for us, we are looking to launch a micro fund so that, look, we can deploy the checks as fast as possible to these companies so that they can fill in, they can actually solve the community problems that they have, right? Using software. And then ultimately, if they're lucky, turn these into global businesses. And that's where Trinity Loan Partnerships comes in. So most importantly, I think places like Botswana need global partnerships. And I think we were having conversations with Singapore. Hey guys, help us. I think, Jarin, we ran a Connecting the City challenge together with you and the World Bank. We did something with, 22 on Sloan. I think they were running competitions. Some of our startups were able to apply. We have one fintech company, Ipachi Capital, who are actually getting on Sloan, and they're actually a cohort member of our program now, right? In Botswana. So that just shows you that the borders, the biggest lesson from COVID is, tech doesn't care about the borders. The borders, COVID erased the borders. It actually just said, look, unlock the opportunity, partner, and look to the global market and be exponential about what you do. So this is what the lesson we had, and we're hoping that we can leverage this to bring value to Botswana.
Right, thanks, McKinsey. So, you both of you have mentioned great points about ecosystem stakeholders, right? I think one of the key things to enable Africa to move forward as a promising region for startups and for investors to drive foreign direct investments would also be policies. So governments plays an important role in both your countries. Could you share with me some of the favorable policies for startups and investors? Maybe Dr. Gamu would like to go ahead first.
Okay, I'll start off just by highlighting a point that Moketsi just mentioned around early stage investment. It's such an exciting space to be in at the moment. Just 2 weeks ago, we hosted the Early Stage Investment Summit in partnership with some ecosystem partners known as Josie Angels. And throughout the first week of November, early November, latter October, the conversations were absolutely exhilarating because what we are finding in the ecosystem is that you're having more and more individuals and smaller companies who are interested to part with small ticket numbers, especially in early stage. There's a wider and bigger appetite to invest in African startups, irrespective of not having a fully functional prototype or a fully fleshed service offering, but one that certainly shows a sound return on investment. So that early stage investment becomes quite catalytic to get it to the next level. And majority of this investment, like Moketsi mentioned, has been coming from outside of the continent. Again, to my earlier point, it's indicating that Africa isn't the next best thing after sliced bread. But the Africans themselves are equally jumping on the bandwagon. And some of these activities were already happening, just not in structured platforms. There are quite a few organizations that we also met, which are strictly focusing on training early stage investors to just understand what the process entails. Because the way we've been doing early stage investment is, hey, you know what, I want to invest in your business. I give you $10,000, but we actually don't always unpack the T's and C's that apply. So, Moketsi, thanks for just raising that up, because indeed it is an exciting space. Now, coming to the policy element, oh my word, co-creation and collaboration is literally the next best thing. It's the new competition. On the 8th of October, we hosted what was called the Partner Dialogue, where we had private sector, public sector, as well as the entrepreneurs themselves sit around tables and actually workshop some of the key issues that they face. There were 4 themes that we unpacked that day, such as access to finance, markets, the traditional ones, as well as capacity development program and the small business policies and regulations. And 2 issues that came out of those subcategories was the criteria, number 1, number 2, the time, and number 3, the finances required to set up a small business, and how this process ends up affecting a small business's ability to supply products and services. Because you may find that the terms and conditions are such that you only get paid after 30 days or after 60 days. I need to get products moving now. How best do we go around unpacking those issues? So having public sector, such as the Department of Small Business Development, with us that day, listening to the experiences of small businesses as well as those of private sector, it has afforded us a platform to translate that and equally offer proposed solutions, such as reviewing some of these policies such that they are cognizant of what is currently happening. You may find a policy from 1862. We're in 2022. Does it still need to apply? Exactly, Moketsi, not quite. Another element that was reviewed is, can policymakers also start having conversations with those who are impacted on the ground, instead of just having the conversations in limited spaces, because experience on the ground is the best teacher. So we're hearing quite a lot of whistles around a startup policy. What that's going to look like, well, we'll be able to tell you at GEW 2022, but it's quite an exciting thing for us to work towards a startup policy. And this, our hope is that it would enable the counterparts, not just within the Southern African region, but other regions, to maximize on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, especially if one falls within that category of being a small business. Our counterparts in Algeria, have already got a sound 3, 4, 5 kilometers ahead of us in terms of drafting and implementing, testing it out within their context, the entire Maghreb region. So if one is coming from Egypt or Tunisia and you want to explore the Algiers market, the startup space there, at least you do have that opportunity to do so.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Kamoon. Definitely, I think the policies makers have to have policies that's relevant in today's day and age, and definitely look forward to have to hear more about them next year. And I think let's hear from Moketsi.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gamu, for putting salt on the meat. I like people that speak on behalf of the government. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the government in Botswana. I don't work for the government, so I'm going to be very straightforward. Like, look. I think governments in Africa are late. Okay, they're very late in embracing the change that's like really happened. Like, if you just look at like what happened through COVID. I think just most economies crashed because they were not ready, they delayed to implement policy. But typically, I mean, Botswana is like, let's just speak of Botswana. I want to be frank here because, you know, Botswana is not like Uganda. Botswana is not like one of these like typical African countries. We're speaking about an organized government that's wealthy. If you compare it, you're looking at Bahrain type of government, you're looking at Singapore type of government, you know, but the agility to just make things work, like, I'm sorry, but it's terrible. It's terrible to put it out, right? It has to be said, we're business people, so we have to move with speed, right? But you know, policy has not favored entrepreneurs, especially in the times of COVID and even after COVID. Even now, like where the economy has just completely shifted. Like people need to know, like even now, like Jonathan said, you know, nobody could believe like government people could have meetings and sign deals and transfer 100 million pula over a Zoom call, right? They didn't, but the rest of the world, in other parts of the world, right? Like Singapore, for example, policy was already advanced in doing simple things, right? Like that, right? So I think, you know, places like Botswana really should pick up the success, right? Because we've got the fiscal strength, we've got the good policies on paper, but we failed in execution. But what's interesting though is, look, government is really coming up. It's coming up. I mean, they've set up an instrument called Smart Botswana, right? I'm not driving that, but they've set up something called Smart Botswana, which is an engine that wants to drive e-gov, right? But I think that's just not enough, right? Because look, you're still stuck with what we call small SME policy. The world now needs startup policy like what Gamu spoke about. Countries like Algeria, Tunisia, Rwanda, they've adopted startup policy and act to enable the startup, right? And this takes it home in just maybe understanding, if government understands that an SME is not like a startup is not an SME. And also just understanding that like smart capital is not like traditional capital. So if you leave behind government in terms of understanding that with the world advancing, with the formation of platform, with the formation of software as a service, with now the emergence of venture capital funding, and then your policy is still looking for charity money from the rest of the world, donor-driven money, you're still stuck in 1991, right? So we've seen, I mean, instruments like in Africa, I'll speak broadly, in Africa, you know, like Smart Africa. These are countries like, for example, South Africa has joined. I saw President Cyril Ramaphosa launching a discussion with the startup, with the entrepreneurs discussing the Startup Act. This is what Botswana should be doing, right? We've also seen like, you know, the interest of example, like Enterprise Singapore during the time, interacting with places like Botswana. But obviously they won't come in if the policy is not ready for smart capital from Singapore, right? Or from the rest of the world. We also have picked, you know, like with our collaborations with our friends from the World Bank, and I say our friends in quotes, because they've ran country diagnostics to tell governments what they need to do. But are governments actually playing their part, right? Because the whole idea is to create a private sector. And I think people miss our goal or our role as ecosystem builders, as entrepreneurs. You know, the whole goal is to create enterprise. And so, but we need an environment that welcomes that. And that environment should be able to welcome, for example, smart capital from Singapore. I should be able to tell a company in Botswana that they can get investment from 22 ounce loan as easily as like this. But we have to still worry about where's the company incorporated, you know, all that nonsense that, you know, so we really have to, I think, also look at ourselves. We're only 2 million people, right? I mean, 2 million, right? What can you sell? Like what investor can you attract to come and invest in your startup at what minimum ticket size? If you're telling them you are in a market where there's 2 million people, right? So you've got to think and then be broad about leveraging the exponential of 300 million people in Southern Africa, leveraging the South Africa advantage through instruments like SACU and so on, and inputting that it be deliberate, that there be a framework for digital startups, right? And then finally, look, the confusion with people putting insects in bottles and exporting it, that needs to stop, right? Because Africa's future lies in the young people developing tech, right? So people need to know, like, I get obsessed, like when people bring up, whether if it's corporate or whatever, trying to say they're supporting entrepreneurs when they're just simply putting people into slavery. So we need to push this whole platform of, hey, look, if you're doing insects, it's all great, put them in the bag, it's nice, export them to the US, great. But the next frontier is policy recognizing the tech startup and bringing in smart money into financing that, right? And understanding it's all profitability first and not being apologetic about it. That's why so many funds from the rest of the world are going to the 4-tier countries, being Kenya, South Africa, Lagos, Nigeria, and Tunisia, right? But the rest of, but then forget that there are 55 countries. But the largest share of the 3 billion that we're speaking about is going to Gamu and her people in South Africa, right? Our friends in the Niger area or in the other parts of Africa will not benefit of that money because the policy in those environments is not great. What ultimately happens is these founders are forced to incorporate outside their jurisdiction because their current environment does not allow them to raise smart capital. So we want to be clear in saying, look, we are not government people, but we like to advise government. But as you say, advice is advice, right? But people have to model what's happening in the rest of the world. Look to Estonia, look to Singapore, like copy and paste. There's nothing wrong. Copy and paste and replicate. And that's why we've been building a strong relationship with Jaireen in Singapore, because we think we can learn a lot, right? And we don't have to recreate the wheel. Singapore is small, Botswana is small, right? Singapore is wealthy, Botswana is wealthy, right? You've got a lot of young people. Singapore probably has the same. So why don't you just export the product, the policies, and localize? Rwanda has done that. They went to land in Singapore. They went to Estonia and land. When you just fly into Rwanda, it takes you 2 hours to register a company. It takes you less than 2 hours to set up a company. It takes you less than 2 hours to make sure you have launched and you fly out, right? So this is the ease of business that we're talking about for startups, right? If we can lower that down into less number of days and so on. But also finally, let me just conclude by saying, look, you've got to take away that, let the government do GovTech and all that. But there should be another way of creating a private sector outside GovTech. So innovation is not creating for the government. So if policy is going to say, we're only going to support the hackathons that are solving solutions for government departments, what happens to the young people who are solving the problems for the people that just want simple to send money from Botswana to South Africa that government is incubating? What about those, right? Who's going to support those? Because those are in the private sector and they need a different set of instruments to be able to transact. So let's enable smart money to come into African countries by making sure we've got the right tools in place to attract world-class capital. So I think this is what I think I can advise to the government. I'm sorry if I've hurt people's feelings, but I'm an entrepreneur. I don't like to put butter on the bread, but it has to be what it is.
Thanks, McKinsey. It was a very, I would say, honest sharing for personal experience, and definitely I think it has a lot of insights from the ground and how our stakeholders in each of the region can then support one another and then improve to create a better ecosystem for startups in Botswana in this case. Right, and you mentioned a lot of foreign investments and for startups to come over to the Africa region to register their companies to look for potential in this market. Could you share with us what are kind of the market gaps there are in Africa? It could be of any parts of Africa. It could also be in your country. So yeah, McKinsey, maybe you could start off first.
Yeah, look, Africa is the future. Even if I think somebody was quoted saying the next group of people that are going to live anywhere in the world, Africa is the place to be, right? So what this says is, if you're going to be sector agnostic, look at the sectors, you have lost it. to look where the opportunity is. It's about where the opportunity dividend is, right? But of course, yeah, we take into account that people need to eat, Jerry. People need to eat. So ag tech comes in as a top priority. People need electricity, right? I was going to ask Gambu why she's connected, because I hear the electricity have been running out in South Africa like crazy. Then all of a sudden that problem came to Botswana, right? Now from Botswana, it's going to go to Namibia, right? Because we rely on South Africa. So clean tech then becomes the next thing, like, hey, look, what technologies can you put on the rooftop? So because without power, I don't have internet, right? Then of course, e-commerce, right? The largest people are in Africa need to transact mobile money, all these things, right? People are buying things every day, right? So e-commerce, fintech, but to make e-commerce work, you need fintech. So people are looking at disrupting APIs and coming up with smart solutions. I know a couple of guys in Kenya that created this thing. Is it not Kenya, Nigeria? This unicorn guy, this guy's from Flutterwave. They've just become a unicorn. That's just the evidence. I mean, the number of unicorns that have just come in Africa in just this short period of time tells you fintech is one of the things you just cannot ignore. Even anyone who's going to make a unicorn in Botswana or Southern Africa is going to be a fintech. Forget it. It's not going to be another. It's going to be a fintech, right? Because people are transacting, right? Yeah. Then finally, it can be logistics. You know, when we speak about the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, you're talking about movement. But if I just gave you the example of, like, we couldn't get medicine in Botswana, we couldn't get food in, right? But if you had companies like Kobo 360, that's like putting together trucks and aggregating using tech to move food from one place to the next, Trigger Foods in East Africa. So, I mean, this is where I think the opportunities lie, Jereen, for the investor, right? And yeah, we just have to be open, right? This is what I've picked. And of course, look, places like Singapore, the Asia region, this is where we need to bring the money from, right? Our obsession with the US money and the European money needs to stop, right? Because I told you, tech doesn't care about borders, it doesn't care about regions. We need to educate more people in the Asia region, like Singapore, to invest. And that's why we're having these conversations with Enterprise Singapore to say, hey, look, don't forget, Botswana is like a wealthy little country in Africa. So go tell them. Yes, of course, we'll leverage, we'll need South Africa, right? But it's able to put the money here, right? It's an advantage. If you go to Rwanda, Rwanda is winning because they're very small, 14 million people, but they've put the right policies and they've got smart money. But at the end of the day, Rwanda doesn't become successful without Kenya, without Uganda, without Burundi and the DRC. Then you've got the 80 million people in DRC alone. So you see the advantage. So we've got to, like, give a strong message that, hey, look, when you go to Africa, look for small, but also think about what's next to that small. So this would be what I would advise the investors from Singapore in terms of, hey, look, what can we do? And that's why I'm launching a microfund. So anybody that wants to work with me, and that's why I've invited you, Jerry, right, to come do hunting with me in Botswana, right? And I think you understand what hunting is to look for the best startups in Africa and put in the check. And we have to put the check sizes very fast so that if Gamu has a bigger fund, she has in Joburg, we can't win without her, right? Because these other small markets are test beds. So once we have a test bed, and then they go to 22 on slow, they can accelerate to the rest of the 54 countries in Africa. So this is the framework in which all of this needs to be crafted. And I'm so happy that you put the three of us. I think there was a reason for that interaction to happen, to say, yeah, look, they'll all go test. We'll pick come here, they test, because here the environment is good. We'll pick them from Namibia, they come here, they test, and then they go to South Africa. We scale them, right? So this is the thinking that we have in terms of what needs to be done.
Right. Thanks, McKinsey. This just shared a lot of the opportunities for the market and in Africa itself, and that's this is for startups expanding to your region. Could I hear from Dr. Gamu? Maybe you could share with us some of the market gaps that you think in South Africa. What would be the unique value for lending in South Africa, and how can your organization be a catalyst for those interested in the Africa region?
Awesome. I'll touch on an earlier point I made, which was around the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, right? And complemented with a point which Mketsi just made around not being very pedantic about specific sectors, but looking at where opportunities lie. Now, if one unpacks that entire thought process of what the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement has to offer, it speaks to food, it speaks to logistics, it speaks to technology, literally everything. And with an increasing population and urbanization, we start talking about smart homes, we start talking about mobility, we start talking about digital transformation, given that some people have become accustomed to working from home or from their various institutions. So irrespective of where you look across the continent, the opportunities are there, and one should not limit themselves to say, I'm just coming in and you must fit into my box because I'm experienced. So for those who are keen to explore these opportunities in the African continent, come with an open mind, come with an appetite to actually want to wear the shoes or even attempt to wear the shoes of the guys on the ground and see the opportunity from their perspective. We've noted that in the past, there would be a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of external collaboration, whether it's financial or non-financial, in terms of, hey, since I am a pro in this space, fit in my box. Look at it other way around. And with that being said, the key element when it then comes to areas of interest is the aspects of digital or hard tech. What is this opportunity actually catalyzing? I could be using hard tech in terms of the hard infrastructure, which is where we can co-create and collaborate with counterparts, or from a system development, software development, app development, you name it. One of the key elements that we offer at 22 and Sloan is the Catalytic Program, which primarily focuses on acceleration. Now, these entrepreneurs tend to be relatively well established, and they're keen on elements such as access to markets beyond the South African borders into the continent and so forth. They're also looking for access to finance, saying, guys, we've been operating for a while. We actually have a track record to showcase. And most importantly, we've got a market that needs to be serviced. And lastly, the networks and collaborations. So for those who are interested to suss out what the appetite looks like within the South African environment, that's where 22 on Stone becomes well positioned, because we are a major player within the ecosystem. Whether we want to pick on elements of what private sector may typically look for, or elements of what public sector may typically look for, and have those conversations either or. So by landing at 22 on Sloan, at least you are guaranteed that the conversations that one wants to have can be streamlined in the name of, co-creation as well as entrepreneurship. It's also easier that way because elements of due diligence of specific startups have been conducted. To an extent, your interests have been taken into consideration in terms of what business stage you want them to be in, or what opportunities/sectors you'd want them to focus on. And primarily from a regulatory perspective, we'll be able to have conversations, say, right, if you're going to have a chat with GEW about importing or exporting from South Korea, Singapore, whatever the case may be, these are the typical processes to follow. So it doesn't become a shock to the system. But coming back to your earlier question around policy, we believe if we continue having these partner dialogues with all the stakeholders involved, at least we can work towards churning the mindsets of the decision makers to be more considerate, because we want to enable what I've just shared now to occur more efficiently and smoothly.
Great, thanks, Dr. Gamu. Right, so coming to the last question for this panel, really just to give you guys a word shout out to the global audience here. What are the programs or activities having upcoming in the year 2022? Maybe Dr. Gamu, you may want to share yours, and then we'll move on to it.
Awesome, thanks. Firstly, we definitely want to continue strengthening our conversations and relationships with counterparts on the continent, because we know ourselves that, hey, let's co-create here. By the time external investment partnerships come in, it becomes easier. Like Monketsu was saying, if funding needs to be sent through to a startup, a Botswana startup based at Sloan, it just becomes easier knowing that there's a network along that nature. So strengthening that Gen Africa collaboration, that's first. Secondly, we have pitching activities currently happening during the GEW week for the Catalytic Program, which I just mentioned, focusing on acceleration. And next year, January, we're really just looking forward to having 1, 2, 3, maybe 6 accelerate, have a good story to tell, not just in terms of accessing additional capital, but also establishing partnerships beyond the South African borders and into the continent. We also have what we call the Capacity Development Program, which is a co-created platform focusing on incubation. Now, an analogy I usually use is that we all want a ready-made product, right? Especially if you want to put money down. But are you always willing to take the journey from an early stage perspective and be a mentoring angel, as I'll put it, and say, actually understand this lettuce, how was it grown? The tomatoes, how were they processed into tomato sauce? This filet, how much time did it take to create that filet? Because entrepreneurship itself is a journey. So from that incubation perspective, we certainly want to decentralize the 22 on Stone model and get more into some peri-urban areas where the insights, tools, tricks, and techniques of what entrepreneurship entails can be disseminated from an incubation perspective. Those are literally the 3 high-level programs that we are looking to employ. But one word I just left out in the first aspect is, from a Gen Africa perspective, enhancing those entrepreneurship exchange programs. Have Moketsi come here a little more often than he goes to Rwanda, and vice versa.
Great, thank you, McKinsey. Programs.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gamu, for that. I mean, we're gonna pick it up and say, I think something is due. So on my side, no later than January, you should see the deal flow, right? I think we need to pipeline more, right? Yeah, just before I come to the points, I think I wanted to mention that we have picked that there are actually 2 ventures from Botswana that have actually, capital from Singapore. And one company received about, I think, $10 million. We were just in touch with them. What's the story look like? And now they've expanded to Australia, right? And this is a 100% Botswana citizen owned, like from my city, right? So this is, I'm not giving an example of, hey, look, this is just talk. Then we have another local company. It's an insurtech that's received as well funding from Singapore, I think in the range of $3 to $5 million. So yeah, so this shows that like it's possible for something to happen in the short term. Yeah, so I think what we see in 2022, it's very clear. I started by saying it. We're looking to create a micro fund in the range of $1 to $3 million. I've already invited Jerry into that. So Irene is actually going to be coming down to do hunting with me, right? Like literally hunting in Botswana. So that's the one part about what we want to do in the short term. And of course, we've got partnerships with a corporate bank called Stanbic Bank. So we hope through that we'll be able to pipeline and create something that works. And obviously, lastly, we're leveraging the global networks to make things work. So once we get to the GEC, I think we should have a storyline to tell about, hey, look, between January and March, what have we achieved? So Jerry, your ticket can be paid anytime once you have a calendar. So I'm going to challenge you to make January before the GEC so that we have a storyline. I can carry your ticket costs, so if you want. And then I think Gamu can host you in terms of just making sure that this fund doesn't leave her out. So I think this is what I picked from what we should do in the short term before the GEC, yeah?
Sure, thanks, McKinsey. So yes, I think look forward to the exciting events that's happening next year from Africa. And for the startups with us, do stay tuned. We'll share more information on what's there to note from the Africa region, and definitely how we can at Gen value add you to your expansion across Africa itself. Right. So thank you everyone for your time, and we look forward to see you in the next session for the rest of the GEW week. So thank you so much and have a great evening. See you.
Thank you very much, Jerry.